Okay, welcome back to A Dangerous Game, Problematic Aspects of Digital Gaming. Before lunch, we had two talks that was both addressing the term addiction. That came with two different conclusions. If there is addiction, there's often treatment. And we will hear Patrick Prax talk more about that. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank
the floor
you,
is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, my pleasure to be here, and it's actually a little bit intimidating to go after two so distinguished colleagues. But I think I might be able to find my niche here and maybe be a little bit in between these perspectives. My name is Patrick Prax. I am an assistant professor. I recently got a position at Uppsala University Campus Scotland in the game design department. And this is research is based on a book chapter that I'm writing together with my PhD student in Uppsala, Paulina Rajkowska, who has sadly not been able to be here today at the Department for Human and Computer Interaction in Uppsala. Just very quickly about myself, and I think this is always quite important when talking about games to just quickly position yourself. I am not anymore as much gaming as I used to be. I have 4 children and a job that makes it difficult to adjust a lot of free time here. But when I have the possibility, I like to play MOBAs. For example, I like to play Dota and lately a little bit Heroes of the Storm. And I also have had a career as a World of Warcraft raid leader for a while in a smaller raid. So this is sort of my gaming side of things. My dissertation has been written about co-creation in World of Warcraft, also based on some of these experiences. Let's zero in on the topic of problem gaming that we have today. We already heard some discussion about the official status of game addiction from the perspective of the diagnostic manual. That is actually not the only international health or like a body in working here. Also, the World Health Organization is right now debating how to deal with game addiction, problematic gaming, and issues around this. And this is an ongoing struggle. Right now, the WHO has invited comments by researchers about their proposed introduction of notion of problem gaming into their catalog of psychological illnesses. And yeah, you can see some of the discussion going on here on the screen, where it's seen as a problematic to represent gaming as a real disorder or maybe symptoms of a pre-existing condition, and there's an invitation for more discussion and more controversial discussion that I think we can also and are having here today, which is why this is a very interesting event. But also a request to go more down to the patient level and do interviews with patients on this about this topic, and this is something that we have done. So we have been taking some of the perspectives on problematic gaming from previous literature and game addiction, and use them and try to see, based on these different perspectives that are already existing, how then people that are treating problem gaming, people that are treated in problem gaming, and even their family and their environment and their parents are understanding these issues. So as a theoretical basis, we choose one of the most prolific and most used addiction measurements based on Griffith work, which is using salience, mood modification, tolerance, withdrawal, conflicts, and relapse as defining moments to measure if somebody is an addict. And I think you need to qualify and have 4 of them in order to qualify. And we took previous pre-existing research from, for example, Faltin's work, who used and discussed comorbidity and life phases in the environment of the problematic gaming. He's also going to be presenting later, so I'm referring to him at first name. And also from our interviewees then, we got more literature to use, which is network perspective, which is social work perspective, looking at a problematic environment as an environment connected to and related to all the actors that are participating here, and trying to sidestep the problem of focusing on just an individual person that is maybe exhibiting a problematic behavior. And the notion of motivations in gaming as a possible perspective that could explain what gaming is. So the most well-known one of these is the Griffith model of addiction, which is what we have now also discussed before, a model that has been taken and has its origins in substance addictions, and has then been adapted to gambling, and has since then been adapted to gaming and a multitude of other behaviors as the strongest aspect in the school of behavioral addiction research. So, and again, this step has been highly criticized. It's not really clear how and if behavioral addictions are just, if we can just take these tools and use the way we look at substance addiction for behavior addiction. We have, for example, here a quote from Suisa from 2008. These tools are still clearly incomplete and insufficient for diagnostic evaluation. For example, clients are always alone when they complete the questionnaires, and there are no questions about family context, despite the belief that family context is important, an important marker in the dynamic surroundings, the onset, continuance, and termination of gambling. This is on the step from substance addiction to gambling addiction already. So you see, in this theoretical framework that we've chosen, there's already some conflicts. We have one perspective that says, we need to look at the environment here of this gamer, of this behavior, what is going on around them, and another one that says that we want to look at salience, at return to this behavior. We want to look at the behavior of the gambler. So, yeah, then the question is, what is game addiction? Right? When everything looks like 8-bit Super Mario. Going down to the interview method, we interviewed the professional social workers in Uppsala that were working in Ungdomsteamet. Ungdomsteamet is, as you can read here in Swedish on their website, body of social workers in Uppsala, paid by Uppsala Kommun, who are helping with issues around alcohol, narcotica, doping, tobacco, and problematic gaming. Right, already here, nicely grouped together. This initiative of the people that I interviewed were working on this on a project basis with problematic gaming. Since our interviews, this group has been discontinued. We're 3 people working together on a 100% working place and splitting it up. I think they had 2 years time for that, and now this initiative has been defunded and doesn't exist anymore. This were our first, where we did our first interviews with the professionals, the social workers, but also with families, mostly mothers and sons who had gone through that treatment. The next step of our data collection was at the Spelberoendesverening in Gothenburg, where we also interviewed the people that were involved in treatment. Spelberoendesverening is also typically focused on gambling, but there was a project going on funded by Arvsfonden. I think that's an inheritance fund. So it was funded by money from the Swedish state from people that died and didn't have any relatives, so that the money is used for social projects like this. And here you can see that pengaspel, games for money, are sort of the core business of this organization, but there's also a gaming track running that also funded for 3 years, so also going to be discontinued, sadly, soon. Also here we interviewed the professionals, but also gamers and parts of the family. Just to give a quick overview over that, mostly the gamers we interviewed were male. All of them were actually male, so there's a very clear gender aspect here that we need to explore more. And types of what they have been playing. For example, League of Legends was featuring at the very top, where many gamers were playing that. But also games like Counter-Strike and World of Warcraft, sort of the big multiplayer games that really came up there as well. So what did we find? First of all, we were asking about how they understood what is problem gaming, what is game addiction. And the interesting thing was that for them, game addiction and how to define it wasn't really a huge issue. They either discounted games as something that is incredibly important and said, well, we're not here to deal with the gaming, we're here to deal with everything else and help get everything else in that life to work, right? Or they were even seen as, for example here, youth having come to put their life on pause. That is the formulation that was used by this treatment professional in this case, which we then ran with because it was a very interesting perspective on this. So the game itself is also in this metaphor not the thing that is destroying anything. It's something that the life doesn't continue. There should be more life. There should be more living instead of less gaming in the way this is set up. And on the side of Ungdomsteamet, for example, games have even been seen as something valuable, except that they can also cause problems. So games were, from the perspective of these treatment professionals, seen either as something that can be productive, that can be social, but it doesn't need or shouldn't be allowed to take over aspects of the life that are also important, or they were seen as actually maybe not even all that relevant to the ongoing problem. Yes, they are there, they are causing a problem, but what's really happening is that we need a life, and we need to press the start button on this life again. So in ways of treating this problem, coaching was one of the methods that was used overwhelmingly. Also here, the focus was on life outside of the gaming. So the aim of treatment was not primarily to reduce gaming time. Yes, that would have to happen in many cases in order to allow for a more balanced life. As we just have seen, there's so many hours only in Douglas' presentation of the week. And you cannot keep playing 40 hours a week and expect your life to magically work out just because now you're more aware. So there's, of course, something that can be too much. But on the other hand, that is sort of the side effect of it. The other question is, how can we get more family? How can we get more friendship, more productivity at work, more learning, more intimacy, more happiness into somebody's life? And for example, what was used for that was personal time management charts. Asking the gamer, what do you want out of your life? What do you think would make you happy? As you look there, you maybe don't seem all that happy. What do you want out of your life? And soon enough, there would be responses. Maybe I want to have friends. I want to have a better working relationship to my family. I want to have a job, maybe be able to move out, or have an apartment at some point. Maybe I want to have a partner. Things like that. And then the question is, so what would you do to achieve that? Let's plan this in the day. And how much time would then be left for things that you also want? For example, playing gaming. It's not necessarily always the next step to remove that completely, but to add more life, really. I'm borrowing, again, this formulation from one of the treatment professionals that I thought was really summarizing this perspective. So we had a very strong focus with this network perspective. And the network perspective came from Ungdomsteamet in this case, as actually their own literature and social work that they are using. Keep in mind, we were also interviewing university-educated professionals here. So they had their own literature. They could just give to us and say, hey, take a look at this theoretical perspective. This is what we think is really useful here. So the network perspective, again, means that in social work, instead of focusing on the individual person that you're treating or their problematic behavior, and also that comes again from also substance addictions, but also other problems, you would take a step back and try to take in that person's life on a more wholesome level. What else is going on? Is your family working? Is there a problem? Are you bullied at school? Maybe you have some sort of diagnosis or something. Are you somewhere on the autism spectrum? There's problems with that. Are you very lonely? Even in some cases, and this is of course mostly anecdotal, but we had fairly recurring some sort of trauma, the death of a close relative that pushed the gaming habit into higher gear. Things like that, that were fairly recurring. Taking these into account as well in order to understand what's happening. A dysfunctional family here being the most important part. Ungdomsteamet was still, as the name, I didn't translate that, that's the youth team in Swedish. So they were helping young people with problems. So in that case, that meant that families would come to them, and they would tell that families would come to them and clearly say, my son, it's typically, again, gendered, my son is a game addict. That is our problem. And they would have families where the parents wouldn't be able to stop arguing, even in front of the social workers. So it was fairly quickly clear that what they needed was family therapy or a divorce. Right? It's just that this place was so broken up that it's sort of it was surprising for the social workers that gaming was lifted up to be the problem here, where so many other things had already fallen apart. This really lifts also out this notion of comorbidity, as Douglas mentioned. This doesn't mean that gaming is not a problem, but that there are many other things that intensify and create an environment where these problems then sort of foster or bloom, depending on how you see that. and get worse and make each other worse. Yes, having a problematic family, that can lead to problem gaming. Yes, spending all the time in front of the computer doesn't fix your family. Right? So they intensify each other. One of the notions that was used, for example, by Ungdomsteamet was TT, which stands in Swedish for Tid tillsammans, but neatly translates in Swedish for time together. So they would have families come in and ask them, do you spend quality time? And they would say, no. The only time we spend together is that the parent comes home from work, makes dinner, goes up to the child's room, screams at them a little bit for not coming down for dinner, and that was their interaction that day. Right? So they did not spend quality time. So there's conflict that is taking up all the interaction between, in this case, parents and children. So what then the Ungdomsteam recommended was TT, time together, just as an institution, so to say. So to make it possible to go to your parent or child and say, hey, let's have some TT, let's have some time together, let's do something fun. And that, given this possibility of then finding a place to have a dialogue, would help with the problematic gaming situation. Right? So you would have families who came and say, our child is a game addict. They ask, do you do nice things together? No, we don't. Maybe try that. And now that they have a better relationship with each other, they can talk more, there's a communication channel open again, and that relieves some of the pressure and some of the problems in the family. Right? So this is, for me, one of the best examples for what such a network perspective can deliver. Because focusing on a gamer, in this case, exclusively, might not even afford you the possibility to say, maybe you should do this as a family together, which then in the end is so helpful. Right? So the somewhat obvious conclusion that maybe it's more easy to be a family if you like each other and do nice things together. Right? That can be good advice. That's not necessarily fixing everything. Another side to that was also to creating a better communication, even teaching parents to understand gaming and its what it is about better. So let's just skip to that first. Parental knowledge of gaming was, to me at least, at a shockingly low level. So and in this, so this is a quote from our interviews. With games, I feel really handicapped because I have no idea what they're about, says the parent. I ask, have you done anything about that? No, I haven't done anything about that. To me, that was surprising, to say the least, right? I mean, you'd figure that if your child has this huge problem that you consider, at least these were all people who went to treatment. You go to treatment with your child, you might want to read up, but that didn't happen as much. Also because it's, to be fair, a fairly high barrier to entry. Understanding what Counter-Strike or Dota or World of Warcraft is about, really about, is hard to do in 2 hours. Maybe it takes 200. Right? Really understanding what is a raid, what is how does competitive matchmaking play work, right? All of these are extremely complex activities. So family communication really helping in resolving some of the problematic aspects of this gaming. And all of this at the same point while still allowing for some presence of the gaming in the child's life. However, and this is something that that we also found, and this is something that, again, maybe we weren't necessarily looking for to start with. Here, there is also an element of suffering. Not everything about this is, I mean, while I'm sort of propagating this to you, that the problematic thing of problem gaming is around the gaming, there's also an internal perspective from the gamer. So there's this side to things where the gamer themselves, where they are suffering as well. And that is also an aspect of this. So this is something that can then fall a little bit in between the chairs when we have this discussion. Is it addiction or is it a problem around that? There is this internal side of the gamer to this, where it can be suffering. It can be feeling that everything outside of the game is hurting. There was problems to start with. They weren't addressed. Now it's even more problematic, and it's painful. and it's hard to be that person. So this is also an important element of what we should take into account when we talk about what is problematic gaming. That one part of this problem is actually suffering of the people that are involved in this. So as a conclusion from this, and I still have, if I have some time, some anecdotes, but as a conclusion of this, from this perspective of looking from the side on treatment back to trying to understand what is this animal of problematic gaming, of gaming addiction, we can say that looking only at the screen or the game or the gamer, that is getting it wrong. There is something else around that also needs to be taken into account. I'm not saying that many people or good people in their respective fields are doing this, like only focusing on it, but it is certainly a point where, from our perspective, the scale is tipped a little bit to the side where there's too much focus on the gamer and his or her perspective and her behavior instead of looking to the broader aspects of also the society around them. Understanding the environment around that individual is instrumental for making sense of what is going on. And it's also instrumental in helping them in the end, trying to figure out what kind of life they want to live instead. So from our perspective, there really are people with problems and they are suffering and we need to help them. Like, this is also something that comes out very clearly from the interviews with the people who are treating. It's like, we're not here to stop them from gaming. We're here to help them have better lives, be happy, help them to feel better about themselves. But there's something that is interesting about this, because there's the label game addiction that is still being used. Both in the by both separate groups of treatments, also by even some gamers. So why is that? Why do you still use game addiction? Well, there were a number of reasons for this. The first one is that, first of all, that means that game addiction is used very pragmatically. Using the term game addiction can trigger resources. It can be necessary in order to get your activity funded from the commune level, for example. So in this case, this is something that we need to change and work on politically. It can be a way of making politics to use the label game addiction. Much more powerful in public and discourse than problematic gaming or problems surrounding game activity. But it's also used as a motivation and an identifier by problem gamers that I would call problem gamers. They would call themselves game addicts. And that is legitimate. On a personal level, this use of the term is something that I would not dare touch, because it's whatever helps anybody to have a better life is certainly worth using as a tool. So that can be very useful. I have one example here where a boy I interviewed was discussing, he opened with, I'm a game addict. And he would go on explaining that during his very increasing participation in playing competitive Counter-Strike and building up a clan, and that was going up to European level competitions and even starting to win some competitions, was on the way to get sponsorship for their esports activity. So he's basically on the way of turning it into a job. But of course he also had an 8-hour job, 9-to-5 job on the side, right? That was sort of his main income. He had a social life, he had a girlfriend. All of that had to move to the side in order to make place for this extremely time-consuming, high-level, high-intensity esports Counter-Strike gaming. To the point where he got so miserable that he said, okay, this is going too far, took apart his gaming computer and screen and sent it to different friends so that he wouldn't be able to assemble it, and was like, I'm a game addict and now I'm done with this, and stopped gaming. So he has a better life now, right? He's happier. This is great for him. So keep calling yourself a game addict if that helps you. When I look at this, I would see somebody burning out, attempting to enter a work market of highly competitive participation in esports while trying to juggle 2 jobs. Even asking him, would you also call yourself a game addict if you wouldn't have to have the other job on the side and you could have time for your girlfriend and your friends again? That gets him thinking a little bit, right? So this idea that then it's maybe not at all in these cases the gamer and their activity that is defining what is addiction, but really the problems around it. The notion of that successful poker players don't have a problem. Right? If you're an addict or not, or if you're a gambler or not, that depends on how good you're at the game. If he would have been better and gotten picked up by an esports team, he could have kept playing and that would have been healthy. Right? So that is one example for where we really need to be careful with where we draw these lines of what is addiction or what is a problem, what is going on here, and not be too quick with generalizing and then taking steps that are problematic here, right? So taking the step and breaking into this market, which is extremely hard and extremely harsh work environment, that is of course something that people can also suffer during. So we already had this example from Karen, so I'll cut it short. Addiction is a term that really carries a lot of value and a lot of meaning. It is something that is fairly derogatory in this way and has a lot of societal power, so we have to be careful about it. So if we use it fairly, frequently for something that is spending too much time on an activity that doesn't transfer learning outside and does limit possibilities for social engagement otherwise, depending on what the buttons look like, then we need to be careful with what exactly we're doing here. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Would you say that the term addiction is used more today than, say, for example, 10 years ago?
I think I would, but also because I have started to pay attention to this fairly recently. 10 years ago I was just barely 23 and young and innocent. Yes, I think it's used too frequently. Not only in clickbait on the web, but also in a societal discussion where we use it too quick and too easily in order to mark something that we maybe just have negative feelings about or don't fully understand its cultural relevance.
Okay, and there's political aspects in that? Or?
Absolutely. Now I skipped over that slide a little bit, but if you call something addiction, there's also whole new markets that are opening up for you. For example, the rise of diagnoses of attention deficit syndromes and things like that, mainly in the US, but also in Europe and I think Asia. They open up massive new markets for psychopharmaca, and that is something that can happen if we're not careful with problem gaming as well. Some of these things are happening already. In China, for example, there's industry, there's a market for this camps that snatch up your teenage boy, basically kidnap him and put him somewhere into some very harsh training in order to sort of drill the game addiction out of them. So things like that are developing. They're of course harsh and quite crazy examples for now, and we're far away from having this. But it's still something to be careful about, and that is exactly why we need a discussion around what do we understand as a problem gaming or as gaming addiction right now before we go down further a part of defining this as a medical disorder. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question from the audience here.
So, Joseph?
More to kind of follow on from that. The original question was, is addiction used more often than it has been? And you yourself actually said in your presentation that addiction is kind of like a derogatory term. What I find very interesting is it's a very loaded term because games, it's also an economic thing, not just medication and stuff like that, but in the business model, because games are marketed as the most addictive game ever. You have to try this. And it's seen as a very kind of positive quality in that context. So there's so many different loadings and meanings on this term, and they're all being utilized very differently by these different camps involved. So it was more of a comment than a question.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And to me, this sort of marketing is always a little shady. Try this game, it's the most addictive ever. It's like, okay, so you haven't really sold it to me right now. Of course it's used more carefully in research, but what we do here, even in sort of the ivory towers of research, it has consequences for societal debates. And we have seen, also in Douglas' opening slides, all these books about that are really using this, this panic to sell books to parents who are scared that World of Warcraft is like crack. Right? And so this is something that we need to be careful about. And I try to stress that as well. Not to fall completely off to the other side and say, it's all cultural, or it's all, so, yeah, there is an element of suffering here. We just need to really find a working way of helping people that need our help in this environment. Right? That needs to be the central focus.
So for many of my early studies, I stayed very carefully away from the word addiction. I would use pathological gaming or problematic gaming. And over time, I've just been, battered down into, addiction is the easiest word. Everyone kind of knows what you mean the minute you say it. And so I've started using it even though I spent many years avoiding it very carefully. So what would be the right word then? Because what I found is if I don't use that term, I spend a lot of time really trying to define exactly what it is, whereas I still define it when I use addiction, but at least everyone kind of already knows what I'm talking about that way. So I take your meaning that there can be political motivations, there can be, trying to make your work seem more important, but I've just found practically it's an easy word for trying to describe what often is very technically detailed research.
Yes, I think the same sort of easy use and getting this fast track is also why some of even our, my interviews who sort of say this is not an addiction, we still use it. They have the same sort of approach to that. I personally am trying to go with problem gaming or problematic gaming, but maybe I'm just not as polished into submission yet and into my nice round shape, because I have the same pressures of saying, oh yeah, it's problem gaming. They look at me. It's like, yeah, it's a more critical perspective to game addiction, right? And then there I am again. So yes, it is tricky and it's difficult, but it often is if you want to show things as they are and not in this sort of cultural shorthand in which it's more easy to deal with these concepts. And right now, I tried to show, we are in this phase where we want to have this discussion about what it is. Right? So that's what I want to have, and I think what we want to have more in this event, a discussion about what is this we're looking at. And that's why I would also, in this case right now, try to really motivate people to take this extra effort and take the step and try to clarify really and think about what kind of animal are we dealing with here. But yeah, I understand these pressures, and I'm not sort of saying, you succumbed, how could you? It's completely obvious to me why you're doing this, and also in a given sort of context. But yeah, maybe it's possible to just take a step away and say, we need to think about this again.
Okay.
There's one at least person that's had their hands open from the start in the second row. So that I think one above, but yeah.
Oh,
One more.
okay. Thank you. My question is about treatment. This coaching that you talked about,
Yes.
and trying to implement a more positive aspect of life. How successful has those treatments been? Do you have any figures? If you have 100 people applying for help, how many of them actually do get helped by introducing other elements in their lives in addition to gaming without leaving the gaming completely out of their lives?
I don't have the figures for this. I planned to obtain something like that, and I had this plan to build something like that. It's very difficult because the social work in Sweden, they delete all their data about all their transactions in the past, just like 3 months after they sort of release somebody. So you would have to start collecting data like now and then possibly collect it towards the future. And then some of these initiatives got discontinued. So it was just impossible to get over long-term data from this. Yes?
And also another reflection on that is that if that kind of treatment where you kind of implement other things in life but keep the gaming, that is very different from alcohol treatment or other kinds of substance abuse, then you would be right in calling it not an addiction, you would call it something else. Because with other types of addiction, you can't keep it in your life. You have to refrain from it completely, as I've understood it.
I think that can be an useful line of that you can draw somewhere there. So I think this could be an interesting question. But yeah, I cannot tell you exactly how successful they are in comparison to other treatments. I can say that, and this is mostly anecdotal, and I really don't want to do anything quantitative with it, that from the people that I've talked to, they were fairly positive about their approaches and even anxious about these establishments closing down, and to the point where they would say that I don't know what else to do then if this doesn't exist anymore and where I could come. So from that I have seen positive responses.
Maybe I'm repeating what the person here said, but could you say that gaming is not an addiction because all people that are supposed to be gaming addicted can, if getting the right circumstances, continue gaming but in a lesser quantity? Because like you said with alcohol, there's some people that absolutely cannot drink alcohol because if they stop drinking alcohol and then after 1, 2, 3 years start drinking it, they will fall off the wagon every time and drink too much. And drink. But could it be with gaming that every people that have a gaming addiction can be taught to do it in a moderate sense?
No, I wouldn't say that for every person. I mean, that might be possible, but I'm in no position to make that claim. And there were also interviewees that said, I don't want to game at all, and I want to keep this away from me, which admittedly is very hard in today's life because every second pop-up you get on the internet is somehow gamified. But yes, no, I wouldn't say that. What I would say is that another line where you can find a difference between problem gaming and alcoholism is something that also Karin already mentioned, and also Fatih Carlson's research about life phases shows fairly interestingly, is that people can bounce back from problematic gaming when life circumstances change and they don't have destroyed internal organs or physical, I mean, there's the possibility of returning to a life in a different way than there is out of a substance addiction or even out of gambling. So even there are differences between the two. So this is something that could be interesting to look at if you are searching for more of these differences between the two. Because I think there are plenty, but I think it's very hard to find exactly that line where they are different from each other.
Thank you, Patrick. We will move on to
Thank you so
our
much for the
next
questions.
speaker.